I want to start this deep dive with a kind of ghost story.
Oh.
Yeah, not the kind with, chains rattling in an attic, but a ghost that haunts the way we live right now, this very second.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's a quote from the 1960s, but honestly, it feels like it could have been written 5 minutes ago about me scrolling through my phone.
I have a feeling I know exactly which line you're thinking of. It is the one about the soul, isn't it?
That's the one. The people recognize themselves in their commodities. They find their soul in their automobile, hi-fi set, split-level home, kitchen equipment.
It is a devastating diagnosis. It's so concise. It implies that we don't just own objects. We become extensions of them. Our identity is outsourced to our possessions.
It's brutal. And today, we're doing a deep dive into the man who wrote those words. A man who is, he's a walking contradiction. We are talking about Herbert Marcuse.
Marcuse is certainly one of the most complex, and I'd argue one of the most prescient figures of the 20th century. He sits at the intersection of so many conflicting currents.
Seriously. The more I looked into the source material, the more my head spun. We are talking about a German philosopher, a Jewish intellectual who had to flee the Nazis, right?
Correct. He's part of that tragic intellectual exodus from Germany in the 1930s.
But then, and this is the part that just sounds like fiction, he ends up working for the U.S. government's intelligence agency, the OSS, the precursor to the CIA.
That's right, analyzing the Third Reich.
So you have a dedicated Marxist philosopher, a revolutionary thinker, on the payroll of the U.S. spy apparatus. It doesn't make any sense on the surface.
That is just the first contradiction and, perhaps the most ironic one.
And then Act 3 of his life, he's this classically trained elderly academic writing about, heavy German philosophy. Hegel, Freud, Marx.
The big three.
And he somehow becomes the grandfather of the hippie counterculture, the hero of the student revolts of the 1960s. He's the guy bridging the gap between old European theory and American rock and roll rebellion.
He really was the conduit. But while the biography is fascinating, the mission of this deep dive, as I see it, is to grapple with his central premise. And it's a terrifying idea. The problem of what he called comfortable unfreedom.
Comfortable unfreedom. That's the hook right there. Because usually when we think of oppression, we think of misery, we think of chains, of poverty, of, Orwell's boots stamping on a human face forever.
Precisely. That's totalitarianism through terror. But Marcuse asked a harder, more subtle question. How does a society that seems free, that seems prosperous, actually trap its citizens?
How does it happen without the jackboots?
His premise was that in modern advanced industrial society, we have lost the ability to think critically, or what he called negative thinking.
And why?
Because we are so comfortable. We are fed, clothed, and entertained so efficiently that we lose the will and maybe even the ability to demand anything fundamentally different.
So today, we're going to dissect that. We're going to look at the concept of the one-dimensional man. We're going to tackle his incredibly controversial ideas on repressive tolerance, which, it explains so much of the debate we see on college campuses today.
It absolutely does. It's the intellectual root of it.
And we'll see why he thought the working class, the traditional heroes of the Marxist story, had essentially sold out for creature comforts.
It is a heavy stack of concepts. Marx, Freud, Hegel. But they all point to that one nagging question he leaves us with. Is your happiness real? Or is it just a beautifully engineered way to keep you quiet?
Let's rewind. To understand how a guy ends up basically predicting our obsession with smartphones back in 1964, we have to see where he came from.
You have to start in Berlin, turn of the century. Herbert Marcuse was born in 1898.
And the sources paint a picture of a very specific type of upbringing, right? This wasn't a story of poverty and struggle.
No, not at all. He came from an upper-middle-class Jewish family in Charlottenburg, a prosperous district of Berlin. His father was a textile merchant. This was a comfortable bourgeois existence. He was well-integrated, assimilated into German society. He wasn't an outsider looking in. He was part of the fabric of that world.
And then the pivotal moment for his entire generation arrives. World War I.
The cataclysm, the end of the old European order.
And this is where I found the first detail that really stuck with me. He gets drafted in 1916. Now, usually when we read about WWI writers or philosophers, we picture the trenches. We picture the mud and the horror of the Western Front. But Marcuse had a very different experience.
He did. Because of his poor eyesight, he was deemed unfit for frontline combat. So instead of being sent to Verdun or the Somme, he spent his service in the horse stables in Berlin.
In the stables. The future philosopher of the radical left spent the Great War shoveling. well, tending to horses for the German army.
It is a humble beginning for a revolutionary, certainly, but there is a crucial distinction here. Because he was in Berlin and not in a trench in France, he was witnessing the collapse of the German home front firsthand. He saw the strikes, the food shortages, the growing discontent.
He was at the political heart of the empire as it crumbled.
And he managed to do something quite extraordinary. He actually secured permission to attend lectures at the University of Berlin while he was still on active duty.
So, shovel manure by day, study high philosophy by night.
Essentially. It speaks to his incredible intellectual drive even as a young man. But it wasn't just books. As the war ended in 1918, Germany went into absolute chaos. The Kaiser abdicated, the monarchy collapsed, and there was this massive power vacuum.
And Marcuse didn't just watch from the sidelines.
Not at all. He joined a soldiers' council.
These were the revolutionary councils, right? Kind of modeled after the Soviets in Russia.
Exactly. They were sprouting up all over Germany. For a brief, chaotic moment, it looked like Germany might have a socialist revolution. This was the Spartacist uprising, led by figures like Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. And Marcuse was there. He was a member of this council, participating in the attempt to reshape society from the ground up.
But it failed.
It failed brutally. The uprising was crushed by the Freikorps. These are right-wing paramilitaries, demobilized soldiers who were virulently anti-communist. And this is a key psychological moment for him. He saw a revolutionary door open, and then he saw it slam shut with extreme violence.
So he learned a lesson there.
A very harsh one. He saw that the old order was incredibly strong enough to survive even a world war and a popular uprising. He became disillusioned with the Social Democratic Party, which he felt had betrayed the revolution.
So the revolution is dead for now. He's disillusioned. He pivots back to what he knows, academia.
Right. He leaves politics behind and goes to the University of Freiburg. He gets his PhD in 1922, writing about the German artist novel. He tries to work in publishing in Berlin for a few years, but the pull of philosophy is just too strong. He returns to Freiburg in 1928 to write his habilitation.
And the habilitation, that's the advanced postdoctoral qualification you need to become a professor in the German system, right?
Exactly. It's a second, more substantial dissertation. And this is where he meets a giant. His advisor is Martin Heidegger.
This is one of the most significant and, frankly, tragic relationships in modern philosophy.
It really is.
We need to unpack this because Heidegger's a name that gets dropped a lot, but he's notoriously difficult to understand. What was Marcuse trying to do with him? What was the project?
To put it as simply as possible, Marcuse was trying to bridge a huge gap. On one side, you had Marxism. Marxism is great at analyzing economics, class structures, historical forces, the big material world out there.
But it can be a bit cold, can't it? It treats people as groups or classes. It's all about the proletariat, not about Bob and his anxieties.
Exactly. On the other side, you had Heidegger. In 1927, he had just published his magnum opus, Being and Time. He was working on ontology, the study of being itself. He was asking these deeply personal, existential questions. What does it feel like to exist in the world? What is the nature of anxiety? How do we relate to our own finitude, our own death?
So Marcuse is trying to mix the hard economics of Marx with the deep existential dread of Heidegger.
Yes. He wanted to create a concrete philosophy. He felt that Marxism was missing a theory of the individual, of the lived experience of alienation. And he thought Heidegger's philosophy was too abstract, disconnected from the historical reality of capitalism. He wanted to understand how historical forces like capitalism actually feel on the inside of the human subject.
To synthesize the political and the personal?
A phenomenological Marxism is what some people call it. It was an incredibly ambitious, brilliant project.
But we know how this ends. It's 1933.
The year the Nazis take power.
And Heidegger.
Yeah.
He doesn't just keep his head down. He doesn't just go along to get along.
No. Martin Heidegger actively joins the Nazi Party. He becomes the rector of the University of Freiburg under the Nazi regime and delivers a now infamous rectoral address praising the new state.
I cannot imagine the sense of betrayal. You are a Jewish Marxist, and your mentor, the man whose philosophy you were trying to champion and build upon, puts on the swastika.
It was a catastrophic break. For Marcuse, it wasn't just a political disagreement. It proved to him that Heidegger's philosophy, for all its talk of authenticity, had a fatal flaw. It could somehow lead to Nazism. He realized immediately that there was no place for him in the German university system. He could not be a professor under that regime.
The door slams shut again.
And the synthesis he dreamed of was dead, at least in that form. He had to run.
So this crisis leads him to his true intellectual home. He joins the Institute for Social Research, which we now know as the Frankfurt School.
That's right. He connects with figures like Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno.
This is the famous group. Let's define what they were doing, because critical theory is a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot these days, often incorrectly. What did it mean to them in that moment?
At its core, critical theory is a way of analyzing society that isn't satisfied with just describing how things work. It aims to critique the underlying power structures, whether that's capitalism, culture, the state, the family unit, with the explicit goal of human emancipation.
So it's philosophy with a purpose. It's not just navel-gazing.
Exactly. They were asking why, with all our technology and wealth, is humanity sinking into a new kind of barbarism? They were looking at the rise of fascism, of Nazism, of Stalinism, and trying to understand the deep psychological and social reasons for it. They were combining Marx with Freud, with sociology, with cultural analysis.
So they are watching the Nazis rise, and they're using this theory to figure out why, but they can't do it from Frankfurt.
No, they were incredibly smart. Horkheimer, the director, had moved their endowment to Holland in 1931 just in case. They established a branch in Geneva, and eventually, like so many other brilliant intellectuals of that era, Marcuse emigrated to the United States in 1934.
So he lands in New York. He's safe. He has a position at Columbia University for a bit, where the Institute is now based. But then World War II breaks out. And this leads to the chapter of his life that I still find the most surprising. The U.S. government hires him.
It really speaks to the desperate pragmatism of the war effort, doesn't it? The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
But think about the irony. He is a revolutionary Marxist. He believes capitalism is a system of domination. And he's working for the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which is the spy agency that eventually becomes the CIA.
He wasn't just a low-level clerk either. He started in the Office of War Information, or OWI, working on anti-Nazi propaganda projects. Then in 1943, he joins the OSS's Research and Analysis branch. Right, and he becomes part of the Central European section and rapidly becomes, according to the sources, the leading analyst on Germany.
Leading analyst.
Yeah.
That is a serious title for a refugee philosopher. What was he actually doing?
He was reading everything. He was using his skills in critical theory to deconstruct the Third Reich for the U.S. military. He analyzed Nazi propaganda to understand its psychological effects. He analyzed economic reports to identify structural weaknesses in the German war machine. He wrote reports identifying different factions within the Nazi Party and the German state.
So he was using critical theory as a weapon of war.
In a manner of speaking, yes. He was helping the U.S. understand its enemy not just as a military force, but as a political and social system. His reports, which were later compiled into a book called Secret Reports on Nazi Germany, showed just how deep his analysis went.
And he stayed on even after the war. He worked for the State Department until 1951.
He did. He became the head of the Central European section, working on denazification. He was essentially writing the U.S. government's playbook on how to deal with post-war Germany.
I wonder how that experience shaped him. Most philosophers live in the ivory tower. They deal with abstract concepts. Marcuse spent almost a decade inside the belly of the beast, the biggest, most powerful bureaucracy in the world.
That is a crucial insight. He saw the rationality of administration up close. He saw how modern states, whether they're fascist, communist, or democratic, manage their populations through bureaucracy, through data collection, through paperwork. When he later writes about how society administers the individual from cradle to grave, he isn't guessing. He's seen the memos. He's written some of them.
It must have given him a very different, very concrete understanding of state power.
Absolutely. So he leaves the government in the early 50s. His first wife, Sophie, tragically passes away in 1951. He goes back to academia. He holds positions at Columbia, Harvard, Brandeis, and eventually UC San Diego. And this is where he writes the book that changes everything, One-Dimensional Man, published in 1964. This is his masterpiece, the culmination of everything he's learned from Weimar Germany, the Frankfurt School, and his time in the OSS.
Okay, let's go back to that quote about the soul and the automobile. What is the core argument here? Because on the surface, having a car and a nice kitchen and a hi-fi set, it sounds good. If I have a dishwasher, I'm happy. Why is that a trap?
Marcuse would say that your happiness is real, but it is a euphoric unhappiness.
Euphoric unhappiness. Explain that. It sounds like another one of his contradictions.
His argument is that advanced industrial capitalism, especially in post-war America, has solved the basic material problems of existence for a huge number of people. It's incredibly productive. But in doing so, it has created a closed loop, a self-reinforcing system of control. He starts with the idea of false needs.
What's the difference between a false need and a true need?
A true need for him is a vital biological one: nourishment, clothing, shelter, the basic requirements for survival. A false need, on the other hand, is a need that is superimposed on the individual by a particular social interest in their repression.
So a need created by the system to keep itself going.
Exactly. It's the need to relax in a specific way, to consume the latest entertainment, to have the newest gadget, to behave and consume in accordance with the advertisements. The system creates the need, the need for a new smartphone every year, and then it graciously satisfies that need.
And because the system satisfies that need, we feel grateful. We feel like it's working.
We feel happy, we feel comfortable, we feel free, because we can choose between an iPhone and an Android. But Marcuse says this is a very limited kind of freedom, and because we are so comfortable, we lose the capacity for negative thinking.
Now, negative thinking sounds like just being a pessimist. Oh, everything sucks.
Yeah, it's a technical term from Hegelian dialectics. Negative thinking is the power of critique. It's the ability to say no, to recognize the contradiction between what is and what could be. It's the engine of critical reason that allows you to imagine a fundamentally different, better reality.
So it's the power of imagination, almost.
In a way. And Marcuse's argument is that because the system delivers the goods, literally, we can no longer imagine a world that is qualitatively different. The gap between what is and what could be has closed. All of our problems are presented as technical problems that can be solved within the system, not problems of the system.
We become one-dimensional.
Exactly. This second dimension, the dimension of critique, of opposition, of transcendence, withers away. We become extensions of the objects we produce and consume. When he says people recognize themselves in their commodities, he means our very identity, our soul, is defined by what we can buy.
So if I try to rebel, the system just turns my rebellion into a new product to sell.
Precisely. You see a movie about anti-corporate hackers, but you stream it on a mega corporation's platform. You buy a ripped-up pair of punk jeans from a luxury fashion brand. The system absorbs all opposition and sells it back to you as a style.
This connects directly to his view on the working class, doesn't it? Because in classical Marxism, the workers, the proletariat, are supposed to be the heroes. They are the revolutionary agent who will overthrow capitalism.
That was the orthodox view, yes. But Marcuse looked at the American worker in the 1950s and 60s and said, it's over. He declared the proletariat obsolete as a revolutionary force.
Why? What happened to them?
They had been integrated. The working class had the split-level homes and the hi-fi sets. They had something to lose. He argued that unions and labor parties had become bureaucratized. They were no longer organs of opposition, but had become part of the machine. They were negotiating for a slightly bigger slice of the capitalist pie, not trying to bake a different kind of cake.
Comfort as control. They are terrified of losing their jobs to automation and technology, so they conform. They don't rock the boat.
Exactly. And speaking of technology, that's another key part of the book. He talks about technological rationality. He argues that technology isn't neutral. In this system, technology and science are used as instruments of control. It creates a totalitarian society, not through terror, but through overwhelming efficiency and productivity.
How is efficiency totalitarian?
Because it makes any other way of organizing life seem irrational. Why would you want a less efficient system? The logic of technology becomes the logic of society. It dictates how we live, how we think, and how we spend our time, all in the name of progress and rationality.
So if the workers are out, who is left to change the world? Marcuse didn't just give up and say, well, we're all doomed to buy toasters forever, did he?
No, and this is where he was incredibly prophetic. He looked away from the factories and toward the margins of society. He pinned his hopes on what he called the substratum of the outcasts.
Who are they? Who makes up this group?
It's the unemployed and the unemployable, the persecuted minorities, the outcasts from other countries, the exploited. Essentially anyone who is effectively outside the benefits of this comfortable, one-dimensional society. Because the system doesn't work for them, because they don't have the split-level home, they are the only ones who retain that second dimension. They are the only ones capable of the great refusal.
The great refusal. I love that term. It sounds so dramatic.
It is. It's the total rejection of the system's logic and its values. It's not just asking for reforms. It's refusal to play the game at all. And you can see immediately why this appealed so strongly to the 1960s generation.
The civil rights movement, the burgeoning student movement, the anti-war protesters.
Exactly. These weren't necessarily factory workers demanding higher wages. These were people demanding a completely different set of values: racial equality, an end to imperialism, a rejection of consumerist culture.
It really predicts the shift from class politics to identity politics in a way.
It absolutely does. He saw that the revolutionary energy was moving toward those who were marginalized by race, by social status, by their intellectual descent, rather than just by their economic class.
But Marcuse didn't just talk about economics and cars. He also went deeper into well, our inner lives, our desires, our sex lives. We have to talk about eros and civilization.
Yes, this was published earlier in 1955. It's his famous attempt to synthesize Marx with Sigmund Freud, a Freudo-Marxist synthesis.
Now, Freud is usually seen as pretty pessimistic about society, isn't he?
No.
He basically says civilization requires us to be miserable.
Right. Freud's argument in Civilization and its discontents is that for society to function, we have to repress our basic instincts or drives, particularly our sexual drives, eros, and our aggressive drives, thanatos. If everyone just acted on their impulses all the time, we'd have chaos. So repression is the necessary price of civilization.
And Marcuse challenged that. He thought we could have civilization without misery.
He introduced a crucial distinction. He said, yes, some level of repression is necessary to live together. He called that basic repression. But he argued that capitalism, and indeed all class-based societies, imposes a huge amount of surplus repression.
Surplus repression, so
Correct.
extra misery just to keep the factories running.
Exactly that. It's all the extra repression required to maintain a specific unjust social order. He argued that the performance principle, the demand for ever-increasing productivity, forces us to suppress our eros, our life drive, our desire for pleasure, much more than is actually necessary for human survival. We are conditioned to be productive workers first, and joyful human beings second.
And this leads to that concept as a real mouthful, but the source material highlights it as crucial. Repressive desublimation.
It is a complex term, but once you get it, you see it everywhere. Let's break it down. Sublimation, in Freud, is when you take your raw sexual energy and you channel it or sublimate it into something socially acceptable, like work or art or science.
So desublimation would mean letting that energy out directly, being sexually free.
Right. So repressive desublimation sounds like a complete contradiction. How can it be repressive if you are being sexually free?
Yeah, that's the question.
Think about modern advertising. Think about pop culture, reality TV, the internet. Is it a sexually repressed culture?
No way. Sex is everywhere. It's used to sell everything from burgers to cars to perfume.
Precisely. Marcuse argued that this wasn't true sexual freedom. It was a controlled, managed release of libido. It was inauthentic sexual stimulation. The system encourages a kind of shallow, commodified sexuality. You can be sexy, you can consume pornography, you can wear revealing clothes, but it's all contained within the logic of the market.
So the system says, sure, have all the sex you want, just don't try to change the economic structure.
It's even more insidious than that. By giving people this outlet, this fun, it actually drains their political energy. If people are preoccupied with this localized, managed sexual gratification, they are less likely to be critical of the government or the economy. It desublimates the rebellious energy that might have otherwise been channeled into political action, but in a way that reinforces the status quo. It's a safety valve.
That is fascinatingly cynical. It's like the bread and circuses of the Roman Empire, but the circus is just racy billboards and online dating apps.
And he contrasted this with his vision of a non-repressive civilization. He imagined a world where eros could be freed from surplus repression, allowing work to be transformed into free play. He thought that if we automated labor and distributed resources fairly, we could have a society where morality wasn't based on rigid commands and labor wasn't drudgery.
A pretty utopian vision.
Very. But it was that utopian spark that the 60s generation was drawn to.
So we have this guy who thinks we are trapped by our toasters and distracted by billboards. How does he become this unlikely hero of the students?
Well, by the 1960s, he is teaching at Brandeis and then at the University of California, San Diego. And unlike many older, more conservative professors who looked at the long-haired, rebellious students with disdain and fear, Marcuse looked at them and saw hope. He saw the great refusal in the flesh.
The source says the media called him the father of the new left.
A title he rejected. He was in his late 60s by then. He joked that at his age, he should be the grandfather.
But he really did connect with them, didn't he?
He did. He spoke their language. He took their concerns seriously. He understood that their rebellion wasn't just about specific policies like the Vietnam War. It was a deeper refusal of the whole lifestyle of their parents, of the whole one-dimensional society. He even appreciated rock and roll as a genuine expression of this new sensibility, which is charming for a German philosopher trained in the 1920s.
Who were some of the key figures he influenced?
The list is really impressive. At Brandeis, he mentored Angela Davis, who became a central figure in the Communist Party USA, the Black Power movement, and later the prison abolition movement. He directly influenced Abbie Hoffman, the Yippie leader known for his theatrical protests. In Germany, he was a major inspiration for Rudi Dutsch, the charismatic leader of the German student movement. He wasn't just an observer, he was an active participant in their debates.
So he's cheering them on. But this support for the radicals got him into a lot of trouble. And we have to talk about the essay Repressive Tolerance. This is probably the most controversial thing he ever wrote.
It was published in 1965, and frankly, it is still the blueprint for many of the fiercest debates we have today about free speech, especially on university campuses.
Okay, let's break it down because it's a tricky argument. The standard liberal idea of tolerance is tolerate everything, right? Free speech means everyone gets a voice, even the people you hate, and the marketplace of ideas will sort it out. The truth will win in the end.
Right. That is the classical John Stuart Mill view. Marcuse argued that in a society with deeply entrenched, unbalanced power structures, this kind of pure or abstract tolerance is a trap. He called it repressive tolerance.
How is tolerance repressive? That sounds like Orwellian doublespeak.
He argued that we don't live in a neutral marketplace of ideas. The mainstream media, the education system, the government, they are already rigged. He called it a system of organized repression and indoctrination. So if you just open the floor to everyone, the powerful voices, the ones who own the megaphone, the ones who represent the status quo will always drown out the marginalized and radical voices.
So he's saying that being neutral and tolerating all sides actually helps the oppressor.
Exactly. He argued that tolerating speech that advocates for regressive or oppressive policies actually blocks the path to change and reinforces the existing power structure. It gives the illusion of debate while ensuring the outcome is always the same.
So what was his solution? And be honest, because this is the part that scares a lot of people.
He advocated for what he called liberating tolerance. And yes, this is the highly controversial part. He defined this as, and I'm paraphrasing here, intolerance toward movements from the right and tolerance toward movements from the left.
Wow. He explicitly said we shouldn't tolerate the right.
He was quite specific. He argued that movements promoting aggressive policies, chauvinism, discrimination, or those opposing the extension of public services should not be tolerated. He believed that to reopen the path to truth, society might need to use apparently undemocratic means.
Like what did he mean by that?
He meant things like withdrawing the right of free speech and free assembly from those groups that he saw as actively promoting oppression.
That sounds, well, it sounds like what his critics would call totalitarianism. We have to destroy freedom to save it.
And that is exactly what his critics said and continue to say. But you have to understand Marcuse's logic from his perspective. He believed that democracy we live in is already a form of totalitarianism, a totalitarianism with a smiling face, because it brainwashes people into supporting their own oppression. So he saw suppressing the right not as an act of aggression, but as an act of liberation, or even defensive violence. He compared it to the civil rights movement breaking segregation laws to achieve justice.
This feels like the direct intellectual root of so many arguments we have on college campuses right now. The debate over whether hate speech is a form of violence and shouldn't be protected. When you see students shouting down a speaker they consider dangerous, they are, consciously or not, enacting Marcuse's idea of liberating tolerance.
It is the direct lineage. Marcuse provided the philosophical framework for the idea that in a structurally unjust society, some speech is not neutral. It is an act that perpetuates harm. Therefore, silencing that speech can be a legitimate act of resistance.
Naturally, this made him a massive target.
Absolutely. He was criticized from all sides. He was a radical's radical, but he also terrified people across the political spectrum.
Let's look at those critics. Obviously, the conservatives went after him.
Oh, yes. Ronald Reagan was governor of California at the time Marcuse was teaching at UC San Diego.
I bet Reagan loved having a revolutionary Marxist on the state payroll.
Not quite. Reagan and other conservatives put immense pressure on the University of California system. They objected to his contract renewal. They saw him as a corrupter of youth, someone who was advocating violence and indoctrination. The American Legion demanded his firing. He received constant hate mail and even credible death threats.
Wow, he had to have bodyguards.
His students often acted as his informal security detail. The university eventually let his contract run out in 1970 under all that pressure. But it wasn't just the right who had a problem with him, was it? Other philosophers on the left had major issues with his theories.
Yes, and these critiques are really important. Leszek Huszakowski, a famous Polish philosopher who had actually lived under Soviet communism, called Marcuse an anti-Marxist.
The anti-Marxist. But Marcuse was all about the revolution. How could he be anti-Marxist?
Huszakowski's argument was that Marcuse had thrown out the core of Marx's scientific analysis of capitalism and replaced it with a vague, romantic, new world of happiness. He thought Marcuse wanted a world ruled despotically by an enlightened elite, basically, that Marcuse and his intellectual friends would get to decide what is true and false for everyone else.
That brings us back to the false needs idea. Who gets to decide my need for a new iPhone is false? Maybe I just really like the camera. It feels very elitist, doesn't it? That was exactly the critique from another important philosopher, Alasdair MacIntyre. He argued that Marcuse was profoundly wrong about ordinary people. MacIntyre said consumers aren't these passive zombies, these cultural dokes who are just controlled by advertising. People make choices, they find meaning, they resist in small ways. He thought Marcuse was just looking down on regular people for enjoying the comforts of modern life.
So MacIntyre saw him as an out-of-touch academic.
He called Marcuse a pre-Marxist thinker, basically a utopian socialist who was just complaining about modernity. He went through Marcuse's key positions one by one and claimed almost all of them were demonstrably false.
And even within the social movements he supported, there was some friction, right? The source mentions a feminist critique. He supported the women's liberation movement. He called it potentially the most radical movement of all.
He did. He was very supportive.
Right.
But later feminist theorists, particularly people like Jessica Benjamin and Nancy Chodorow, argued that his reliance on Freud's classical drive theory was a problem. Because Freud's drive theory is very biological and individualistic, it's all about the individual's body and its innate instincts. They felt it didn't adequately account for the social and relational aspects of identity formation, particularly for women. They argued for a more intersubjective approach, understanding how we form our identities through our relationships with others, not just through channeling our inner drives. So even his allies found his Freudian framework sometimes inadequate or outdated.
Despite all this criticism from every direction, he kept going. He kept writing until the end.
He did. He published Counter-Revolution and Revolt in 1972, analyzing the backlash to the 60s movements. He published The Aesthetic Dimension in 1978, arguing for the revolutionary potential of art. He supported dissidents in East Germany like Rudolf Barrow. He never stopped engaging with the world.
And his personal life, the source mentions he was married 3 times.
Yes. After his first wife, Sophie, died, he married Inde Neumann, who was the widow of his close friend and Frankfurt School colleague, Franz Neumann. After she passed away, he married Erika Schrover, a former graduate student of his, in 1976. He had a full and complex life, personally as well as politically.
He lived a long life. He died in 1979.
Just 10 days after his 81st birthday, he was in Germany, in Starnberg. He was actually there visiting at the invitation of Jürgen Habermas, who's sort of the second-generation leader of the Frankfurt School. He suffered a stroke during his visit.
It seems fitting that he died in Germany, where it all started for him. A kind of closing of the circle.
It is. But there is a poignant and slightly strange postscript to the story. His ashes were brought back to the U.S. by his wife, Erika. But for years, they were essentially kept in the States. They were rediscovered in 2003.
Rediscovered, like they were lost in a closet somewhere.
The details are a bit murky in the source material, but essentially, yes. It wasn't until 2003 that a concerted effort was made to give them a final resting place. His ashes were taken back to Berlin and buried in the Dorotheenstädtischer Cemetery.
Is that a significant place?
It's one of Germany's most famous cemeteries. It's where Hegel is buried. And Bertolt Brecht. So the great exile, the critic of Hegel, finally returned home to rest among the giants he'd spent his life studying and arguing with.
So let's zoom out. We've gone from the stables to the OSS to the student barricades. What does this all mean for us today? We are sitting here now in a world he could only glimpse. Why does Herbert Marcuse still matter?
I think his legacy is constantly being debated, but it's clearly visible in 2 main areas. First, as we've said, the nature of protest. The idea of the Great Refusal is the blueprint for a lot of modern activism. When you see movements like Black Lives Matter or Extinction Rebellion, they are often operating on a Marcusian logic, that the system is fundamentally illegitimate and must be rejected, not just tweaked.
They are looking for that new sensibility he talked about, a whole new way of living.
Exactly. And the second area, which is maybe even more relevant to our daily lives, is his critique of technology and consumerism. If Marcuse thought we were one-dimensional because of our hi-fi sets and our televisions, what would he say about us now?
That is the scary part, isn't it?
Yeah.
We carry our commodities, our means of entertainment and administration in our pockets every second of the day.
We do. And our social media feeds and search algorithms predict our false needs before we even know we have them. We are more administered, more managed now than he could have ever imagined. That happy consciousness, he described, the consciousness that accepts the status quo because it is comfortable and efficient, that is the default setting of the digital age.
It brings us right back to that fundamental question of freedom.
It does. Marcuse challenged us to ask, is your freedom just the ability to choose between different brands of the same car? Is it just the freedom to pick which streaming service to subscribe to or which political party to vote for within the existing system? Or are you capable of imagining and demanding a world that is qualitatively, fundamentally different?
That is the ultimate challenge of the Great Refusal, then.
It is. To say no when every advertisement, every algorithm, every comfortable appliance in your life is subtly and efficiently designed to make you say yes.
So, listener, that is the provocation we want to leave you with today. Herbert Marcuse believed we are so comfortable in our unfreedom that we can't even imagine a different way of living. We want you to take a look at your own life. Look at your smartphone. Look at your subscriptions, your gadgets, your perfectly curated online identity, and ask yourself, is your soul trapped inside that machine?
And if you decided you wanted to refuse it, could you even do it?
Thanks for diving deep with us. And maybe try to keep thinking negatively.